Chapter 1. Congratulations. Host. You have completed 5 years of companionship. Only 7 days remain until you can leave this world and revive your family in the real world. Finally hearing the system's voice that she had been longing for over 5 years, Sophia could no longer hold back her tears of joy. She was not originally from this world. 5 years ago, her husband and child in the real world became vegetative after a car accident. In her overwhelming grief, she accidentally bound herself to a companionship system. The system told her that as long as she accompanied the richest man in this world, Gabriel, and his child Andrew for 5 years, she would be able to revive her family. She certainly did not hesitate to accept. From the very first day Sophia came into this world, she knew that Gabriel was in love with Victoria. Yet Victoria was unwilling to marry. She was free-spirited and, after giving birth to Andrew, she abandoned her husband and child, disappearing without a trace. It was at this moment that Sophia appeared, pretending to fall in love with Gabriel, going to great lengths to connect with him, treating him well, and ultimately succeeding in marrying him. For 5 years, she diligently cared for Gabriel, enduring hardships to raise Andrew. But as soon as Victoria returned, their hearts all turned towards Victoria. Others mocked her, ridiculed her, saying she was nothing but a joke. Yet she remained unfazed. After all, in 7 days, her true husband and children would be revived, and she could go home. Suddenly, a notification sound chimed, and she glanced down to see it was Gabriel who had sent it. B City Club. Stomach ache. Send some medicine over. A concise message. Sophia got up and walked to the window. Pushing it open, the heavy snow was falling softly, and the biting cold made her shiver as she opened the window. Going out in this weather was truly a torment, but in the end, she could only sigh, resignedly close the window, find her medicine, change her clothes, and step out the door. There's no way around it. The requirement of the companionship system is that one cannot refuse the father and son. Hastily arriving at the designated private room door, just as she was about to push the door open, she heard the voice of her brother Gabriel from inside. Gabriel, the Victoria you've been thinking about has returned. Are you going to divorce Sophia now? Her movements paused for a moment, and the next second, the man's deep voice, tinged with the scent of alcohol, came through. No, Victoria is free-spirited and doesn't want to be constrained. I love her and only want her to be herself. Sophia takes care of people, does what she's told, and is very suitable to be a wife and mother. As soon as he finished speaking, the tender voice of 5-year-old Andrew followed. She must be very suitable to be a nanny. She has taken good care of both me and Dad over the years. But no matter what she does, I will only ever have one mom. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone else burst into laughter. Andrew's positioning is spot on, but is Sophia really that accommodating? One person was curious one moment, and the next moment someone chimed in to respond. Of course, the reputation of Sophia as a simp is not unfounded. Just wait and see. As he spoke, the man turned his head towards Gabriel and said, Gabriel, can I borrow your watch for a moment? Gabriel glanced at him lightly, seemingly aware of his intention, but he said nothing, slowly taking off the watch and handing it to him. Immediately after, with a loud splash, the man forcefully threw the watch, which arced beautifully, into the lake outside the window. Just then, someone walked over and saw Sophia standing outside the private room, asking, Sophia, why aren't you going in? While asking, he reached out and pushed her towards the private room. Before she could react, she was pushed into the private room. Seeing her arrive, the few people who had just been speaking showed no signs of guilt. Instead, they became even more excited. Sophia, you came just in time. Gabriel's watch accidentally fell into the lake just now. Go help Gabriel fish it out. Sophia looked at Gabriel, silent for a moment, before finally asking him, do you really want me to fish it out? He still wore that nonchalant attitude. Nodding at her, Andrew's eyes were filled with the excitement of watching a show, and he chimed in, aren't you always the one who does whatever we say? Willing to do anything for us? She tugged at her lips and shook her head after hearing Andrew's words. No, not forever. Just 7 days left. Gabriel didn't understand what she was saying and frowned slightly. What did you say? But she didn't even glance at him again and walked straight towards the window. The private room was on the second floor, and the distance from the window to the lake was not very high. She stepped directly onto a stool placed nearby, climbed over the window, and without a trace of hesitation, jumped into the lake. With a splash, the sound of her falling into the water echoed. It was deep winter, and the lake water was piercingly cold, causing her to tremble all over. She bit her lower lip to keep herself from sinking, just as the sounds of the crowd's uproar followed into Sophia's ears. See, I told you Sophia is completely in love with Gabriel and Andrew, right? Just one word and she's down for it in this cold winter. It makes me want a wife who is so hardworking and obedient. But as soon as those words left his mouth, Gabriel shot a cold glance at the speaker, yet he couldn't help but recall what Sophia had just said. Only 7 days left. He scoffed, thinking it was just a tantrum. But what of it? They could still get her to comply with just one word. Chapter 2. Gabriel thought back to their first meeting, when everyone said Sophia loved him, loving everything about him to the point of doting on his children with others. And he believed that too. From the moment they first met, she had been relentlessly pursuing him. Over the years, some were after his money, others for his looks, but none loved him as purely as she did, including Victoria, which is why he married her. Now, 5 years have passed, and her feelings towards him and Andrew have never changed. How could she possibly bear to leave? As he thought this, Sophia appeared at the door of the private room, drenched from head to toe, holding the watch she had just fished out of the lake. When she looked at Gabriel, her voice sounded somewhat weak. I found it! Her lips were pale, clearly in a bad state. Shouting this sentence seemed to have drained all her strength. And in the next moment, everything went dark as she suddenly fainted. Before she completely lost consciousness, she vaguely seemed to see Gabriel's expression change as he ran towards her. It must be an illusion. Ever since Victoria returned, both Gabriel and Andrew seemed to want nothing to do with her. How could they possibly be worried about her fainting? When Sophia woke up again, she found herself lying at home, with continuous laughter and chatter coming from the living room. She took a moment to gather herself before pushing the door open. There were only 3 people in the living room: Gabriel, Andrew, and the one they all hold dear in their hearts, Victoria. At this moment, they were sitting on the sofa, chatting animatedly, but as soon as Sophia came out, their smiles faded. Gabriel glanced at her and said, Victoria will be staying here for a while. Please tidy up a room later. Rarely does Andrew show himself to be obedient and well-behaved in front of her, but at this moment, he was being held in Victoria's arms, acting all cute and spoiled. However, when his gaze turned to her, his tone became quite rude. This is my home. She is my mother, and it is only natural for her to move in. You wouldn't disagree, would you? Sophia pulled at her lips. What right did she have to disagree? Gabriel never loved her. Back when Victoria hadn't returned, Andrew would still call her mom. But ever since Victoria came back, he started calling Victoria mom and her madam. In their hearts, she was nothing more than a nanny. What right did she have to interfere in their decisions? Okay, Sophia calmly nodded, as if this were nothing more than a perfectly normal small matter. Seeing how easily she accepted Victoria's request to move into the house, Gabriel narrowed his eyes in surprise, while Andrew thought little of it and became even more domineering. I'm hungry. Hurry up and cook. Mom likes to eat longjing shrimp and fish head tofu. You should make it yourself. Because of the winter water, Sophia was still a bit dizzy at this moment, but faced with his orders, she had no choice but to endure the discomfort and entered the kitchen due to the system's requirements. With no servants to help, she could only busy herself alone. Through the transparent kitchen door, she could still see in the distance Gabriel and Andrew caring for Victoria with great attention. One was feeding her the pre-meal fruit sent by the servant, while the other carefully poured warm water into her cup, resembling a harmonious and beautiful family. Actually, it's not wrong. They are indeed a family, and I am the outsider. Sophia lowered her gaze and no longer looked, silently handling the ingredients in her hands, her eyes showing no trace of heartache. After all, Soon she would be reunited with her family. Chapter 3. 2 hours later. When Sophia served the dishes on the table, Gabriel and Andrew naturally brought Victoria to sit by the dining table. During the meal, Victoria ignored Sophia completely, eagerly serving food to Andrew. Every time she pinched his face, his expression changed. By the end, Andrew could no longer hold back. His voice filled with grievance. "I don't like eating this. I never eat this either. I clearly told you. Mom, sorry. Mom will remember next time." Victoria apologetically smiled and said something. After hitting a wall with Andrew, she turned to Gabriel, picking up a shrimp and preparing to place it in front of him. But he looked at the shrimp with a darkened gaze. "I'm allergic to shrimp. Don't you remember?" Victoria's expression suddenly stiffened, as she was not in a good mood at the moment due to a series of operations. Gabriel and Andrew, the father and son, did not notice her emotions, but instead both looked towards Sophia. Sophia thoughtfully picked up a plate and served each of them a portion of their favorite dishes in front of them, finally making the father and son satisfied enough to start eating. She calculated the time and remembered that the soup simmering in the kitchen should be ready, so she got up to serve it. As she walked to the kitchen and turned off the fire, the door was opened once again, and when she turned to look, she found it was Victoria. The superficial smile made Sophia frown. Just as she was about to ask why she came over, she spoke first. "Let me help you serve it." "No need." Seeing her walk directly towards the soup bowl, Sophia instinctively opened her mouth to refuse. But in the time it took to turn around and grab a spoon, Victoria had already stepped forward and reached for the soup bowl. "Ah!" A cry of surprise accompanied by the sound of the soup bowl shattering echoed. Scalding soup splattered everywhere, and a portion hit Victoria's hand, causing her eyes to instantly redden in pain. The noise was too loud. Gabriel and Andrew were drawn over by the commotion. As soon as they saw Victoria looking pitiful, they hurried over and asked, "What happened? What's wrong? Missy probably doesn't like me very much, which is why she deliberately splashed soup on me. After all, I abandoned you all back then, and Missy fulfilled the roles of a wife and mother for me. Now that I'm back, Missy must have her grievances. However, I never intended to compete with her for anything." After this exaggerated account, both father and son were instantly filled with rage, not giving Sophia a chance to explain. Their words were filled with disdain for her and pity for Victoria. "What are you grabbing for? My son and I are yours by right. She has no right to lay a hand on you." Andrew's voice was filled with righteous indignation, echoing Gabriel's words. "You wicked woman. Dad married you just to take care of me. You can't really think you're the mistress of the Han family, can you? Recognize your identity, and don't let it happen again." Gabriel cast a cold glance at Sophia before picking up Victoria and walking out, with Andrew following closely behind. No one noticed that, due to the direction in which the soup bowl fell, while Victoria only suffered a slight burn on her hand, a large area of Sophia's thigh was burned red. Perhaps, even if the father and son noticed, they wouldn't care at all. After all, love and indifference are worlds apart. She watched the backs of the few people leaving, the words that Gabriel and Andrew had just said echoing in her mind, and she gave a self-deprecating smile. From the very beginning, she recognized her identity. She was neither their wife nor their mother, and she would leave sooner or later. But after years of hard work and dedication, she had thought that even if there was no love between them, at least there would be some feelings. But now it seemed like nothing more than a joke. But it's okay. She would be able to go back soon. Chapter 4. After limping back to her room and applying medicine, Sophia's phone screen, which had been set aside, suddenly lit up. She casually glanced at it and saw a video from Victoria. "What does it matter that you married him? Aren't they all still gathered around me? Even if I once abandoned them, the ones they like will only ever be me." In the video, Victoria's burned hand had been carefully bandaged. The fastidious Gabriel was personally peeling a pomegranate for Victoria, feeding it to her mouth. After countless arguments about how much she hated practicing the piano, Andrew took the initiative to sit at the piano and play a piece, trying to cheer her up. In the video, the interactions among the three seemed particularly joyful, yet Sophia felt not a single ripple in her heart. Her family had never been Gabriel and his son, Who they loved and who they wanted to be close to had nothing to do with her. She turned off the video, looked at the few belongings that were hers in the room, and silently began to pack them up, waiting for dawn to come the next day to throw them away. The next morning, when the father and son returned, they happened to see her throwing the things she had packed into the trash can. Gabriel furrowed his brow and looked at her. "What are you throwing away?" Her movements paused for a moment, and finally, she lowered her gaze and replied in a very perfunctory manner, "Some useless trash." Andrew approached suspiciously to take a look and saw that the trash can was filled with Sophia's clothes and some personal items. He curled his lip, quite disdainful. "Indeed, it's just some useless trash." Hearing his blatant mockery, she remained silent and did not speak. Just then, Gabriel's phone rang, and Sophia only vaguely heard that he had a collaboration to discuss. Sure enough, after the call ended, he turned to look at her. "I need to step out for a bit. Take good care of Andrew." After he left, Sophia could only look at Andrew, whose face was clearly showing his dislike for her. Ever since Victoria returned, he hadn't studied for many days. Although he was indeed very intelligent and deserved to be called a genius, even geniuses cannot afford to be so negligent. Just as she was about to take him to the study, Victoria walked in, holding a lot of junk food, and gently squatted down in front of Andrew. "Andrew, today Mom has time to spend with you. Do you want to be with her, or with Mom?" Andrew quickly shook off Sophia's hand, joyfully embracing Victoria, who had crouched down to his level, and said, "Of course it's Mom." Hearing his answer, Victoria was both satisfied and smug, huffing at her and proudly pulling Andrew into the living room. Sophia could only watch helplessly as they devoured bags of puff snacks in just an hour, and then all huddled together on the floor playing games, making the house a complete mess. And in just a moment of distraction, Victoria had taken Andrew upstairs to play the game of being lifted high. "Miss He, this is the second floor after all. It's very dangerous to hold a child up like that. You should put Andrew down. It's just holding him up high. What's so dangerous about that?" Victoria dismissed her warning, and even Andrew in her arms pouted. "Ignore her. She's just jealous that I'm close to you." After speaking, she seemed to show off as she tossed Andrew even higher, and amidst his excited shouts, tragedy quietly descended. Victoria was too caught up in her own pride, throwing him too high, and when he fell, she failed to catch him. Ah! Andrew thus fell directly from the second floor, and with a dull thud, he didn't even have time to cry out in pain before he lay unconscious in a pool of blood. Victoria was instantly flustered, her face turning pale, standing frozen in place, unable to move a step. Sophia was also startled by this turn of events, but quickly reacted and dialed 120. The ambulance arrived quickly, rushing Andrew to the hospital. Fortunately, the rescue was very successful, and there was no danger to his life. When he was transferred to the VIP ward, Gabriel happened to arrive just in time. Seeing his head wrapped in bandages, his expression darkened as if ink could drip from it. "Who did this?" "It's Sophia!" "She saw Andrew getting close to me and became jealous, so she intentionally retaliated by throwing Andrew down from the second floor." Sophia looked at her in disbelief, just about to argue when Andrew woke up. Gabriel quickly stepped forward. "Andrew, how's your head? Does it still hurt? Tell Dad. Who was it that threw you down?" Hearing his father's question, his eyes flickered, and he remained silent, while Victoria's heart raced like a drum. Unsure if Andrew would tell Gabriel the truth, he slowly raised his hand, but it pointed directly at Sophia. "It's her. She's the one who abandoned me." Chapter 5. Looking at Andrew pointing at himself with unwavering determination, Sophia's pupils suddenly constricted, as if struck by lightning, standing there in a daze. "I didn't." As soon as the words left her mouth, Andrew's cries for his mother drowned out all her words. Victoria quickly stepped forward to hug him, saying, "Sophia, no matter how much you hate me, why take it out on Andrew? Andrew is only 5 years old. How can you be so cruel?" Victoria's accusations combined with Andrew's brilliant performance. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, if it weren't for Sophia being the one accused, perhaps she would have believed their words. But at this moment, She only felt an overwhelming chill in her heart. Her lips pressed tightly together, staring intently at Andrew. You need to clarify. Who exactly threw you off the second floor? Enough. Sophia! Gabriel stood up, looking at her with fury in his eyes. I married you because you were obedient and well-behaved. But I never expected you could be so cruel as to target a 5-year-old child. Since you refuse to repent, bring her and lock her in the confinement room. She will be released only when she admits her mistake. Gabriel had already believed Victoria and Andrew's words, and he stubbornly made a judgment, looking at her with nothing but disgust, not wanting to hear her speak any longer, directly ordering the bodyguard to take her back to the villa and lock her in the confinement room. Gabriel, it's really not me. I have claustrophobia. You can't lock me in there. Help! Is anyone there? Let me out! In the pitch-black confinement room with not a trace of light, Sophia's face was pale as she kept banging on the locked door. But after a night passed, her voice became hoarse from shouting, and no one came to rescue her. The cries for help gradually weakened, and the knocking on the door became feeble. A heavy pressure in her chest tormented her remaining consciousness, until finally, her mind began to fade. Before the last thread of consciousness faded, she vaguely remembered her husband and child. They are still waiting for her in another world, waiting for her to reunite. They are different from Gabriel Andrew. He is her true love, her family. She was afraid of the dark, and her husband would gently soothe her to sleep every night. Their son, small as he was, would obediently lie beside her, using his chubby little hand to pat her back, saying, "Mom, don't be afraid. I will protect you." At that time, she was truly very happy. But unfortunately, a sudden car accident destroyed everything. They became vegetative, and she was trapped in this world. She cannot give up. Cannot give up. Just a little bit more, and she could leave here and reunite with them. The next day, with a pale face, Sophia was finally released. Gabriel stood in front of her, silent for a moment. Before speaking, I watched the surveillance. It really wasn't your fault. But Victoria wasn't doing it on purpose either. Hearing him casually wanting to turn the page on everything, she suddenly found it somewhat amusing. Upon learning that she was going to harm a child, he unceremoniously locked her in the confinement room. But when he found out it was Victoria, he only said lightly that it wasn't intentional. She wanted to laugh, and she really did laugh out loud. Seeing this, Gabriel furrowed his brows, his tone impatient. What are you laughing at? Andrew isn't intentionally framing you. He's now clamoring to eat the dishes you make. Once you're done, take them over. He spoke as if it were completely reasonable, as if no matter what grievances she had suffered, she should be grateful and serve them whenever they needed her. Sophia wanted to refuse, but due to the existence of the system, she ultimately bit her lip and suppressed all her emotions to agree. Good. Only 5 days left. His furrowed brow had yet to relax, and upon hearing her last mutter, it tightened even further. What are you mumbling about every day? 7 days. 5 days? Nothing. Faced with his questioning, Sophia was not flustered at all and casually brushed it off. Fortunately, he was merely asking out of curiosity and did not take it to heart. Chapter 6. Sophia quickly prepared the meal and took it to the hospital. When she arrived, Andrew raised his little head, a smile on his lips, wearing an expression of expected delight. In the next moment, he obediently looked at Victoria. See, I told you she wouldn't be mad at me. She loves me so much. How could she blame me for such a small thing? So, Mom, you don't need to feel guilty about it. The mother and son ignored Sophia, who stood by, and continued their conversation. She didn't mind. After placing the meal on the table, she simply turned and left. After that day, Sophia did not go to see Andrew again. He and Gabriel were both busy developing feelings for Victoria and had no time to pay attention to her. She was happy to be left alone, continuing to quietly sort through her things. It was only when everything that belonged to her in this home was gone that she took out a photo from her arms. In the photo, there were 2 people, one large and one small. The larger one had deep, cold, handsome eyes, holding a cute child who bore some resemblance to him. Both were looking towards the camera, their eyes filled with love and tenderness. Her fingers gently caressed the slightly yellowed photograph. Her eyes filled with deep longing as she murmured, "In 3 days, I will be able to return to your side." She was immersed in her own world until a bony hand suddenly snatched the photo from her hand. She looked up abruptly and saw that Gabriel, Andrew, and Victoria had unknowingly approached her from behind. "What do you mean only 3 days?" Gabriel was first puzzled by her words, then instinctively glanced down at the photo in his hand. Upon seeing the two people in the picture, his eyes burned with fierce anger, and he tightly gripped the photo, staring at her intently. "Who are the man and child in this picture?" Seeing his father's emotions erupt like this, Andrew also curiously took a glance at the photo, and instantly his anger flared up. "Who are these two, father and son? What is your relationship with them?" For some reason, when Andrew saw the boy in the photo, an inexplicable wave of jealousy surged within him, and he unconsciously gripped harder, causing the photo to bend. This made Sophia's heart skip a beat, and she quickly snatched the photo back from his hand. Sophia looked at the creases on the photo, her heart aching faintly. Filled with pain, she explained, "This is an old friend of mine. We haven't been in touch for a long time," she answered perfunctorily. Gabriel frowned, not fully believing it, while Victoria looked around with some confusion and said, "Why is the house so empty?" Andrew glanced around after hearing this, also noticing something unusual. When he frowned, he bore a resemblance to Gabriel. "You've been losing things for the past few days. How did you lose so much? You better be really just losing your own stuff." After 2 reminders, Gabriel's expression suddenly changed. He ran towards the study without saying a word. Before long, the door was pushed open again, and he came out of the study, his face filled with anger. He grabbed Sophia's hand and said, "Did you also lose the pearl necklace I left in the study?" "Pearl necklace? What pearl necklace? Is it the one I left behind?" "Gabriel, that you still have?" Sophia naturally knew Gabriel's level of affection for that necklace. Back then, Victoria left, taking everything with her. The only thing she didn't take was that forgotten pearl necklace. So from that moment on, the necklace became the embodiment of his nostalgia, and now Gabriel found it missing. He suddenly grabbed Sophia's hand, his expression cold and stern. "Quickly find it for me." A sense of helplessness flashed through Sophia's mind. "I have never touched your things." But the meaning in his eyes was particularly obvious. He did not believe her. "Only you can enter my study at home. If you haven't touched it, who else could have?" "Sophia, I give you 1 day to find it back." Chapter 7. Sophia couldn't refuse Gabriel, and had no choice but to go out and search. After all the commotion, the garbage bins outside the villa were already empty. After asking the cleaner in charge of the area, she learned that the garbage had long been taken to the garbage dump, and with no other option, she hurried off to the dump, ignoring the filth. She searched through the garbage dump for a whole day and night, yet still did not find the so-called pearl necklace, ultimately returning empty-handed. When she finally returned to the villa, exhausted, everyone was asleep, and only Gabriel remained in the living room. Still looking at the reports, she stepped forward and explained again, "I've looked everywhere and couldn't find it. I really didn't lose your pearl necklace. Oh, I accidentally dropped it under the bookshelf. I forgot to tell you. You wouldn't be able to find it anyway," he said. His tone was indifferent, as if he didn't care about the matter, and in the end, he began to blame her for not being adaptable. She paused, her breath hitching, and after a moment, she said, "Didn't you say you wanted me to find it? Whatever you say, I must do it." Sophia's original intention was that she was trapped by the system, unable to refuse any requests from the target of her strategy. But when this reached Gabriel's ears, it took on a different meaning. He clearly misunderstood. His heart trembled slightly, and the way he looked at her changed instantly. Upon careful reflection, Gabriel suddenly realized that over the years, Sophia had indeed never refused any of his requests. This was the first time he had encountered someone who loved him so deeply, even when he had said at their wedding that he would only have one child, Andrew, and would not give her offspring. She had simply nodded obediently and agreed. Looking back on the past, it would be impossible to say that there were no feelings stirred in my heart. When I looked at her again, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of compassion. Her eyes softened as I said, "Go take a shower and rest for a while." Sophia realized he had misunderstood, but she was too exhausted to explain anything further, so she turned and went upstairs to wash up and sleep. Perhaps it was because this day and night had been too exhausting. As soon as her head touched the pillow, she fell into a deep sleep. The next day Sophia was awakened by the alarm clock she had set in advance. Seeing the birthday wishes flooding her email from various platforms, she remembered that today was her birthday. There was no one at home anymore, and she didn't ask anyone else where they had gone. She just bought herself a cake. This was her last birthday in this world, and even though she was all alone, she wanted to celebrate it well. Just as she lit the candles and was about to make a wish, the doorbell suddenly rang. At the door was Gabriel's assistant, who said nothing more upon seeing her and simply handed her a box. "This is the dress Mr. Han asked me to deliver to you. He said to find him on the 5th floor for the night banquet." After delivering the message and the item, the assistant left without lingering. She couldn't refuse and had to return to her room to change into the dress. Hurrying to the address the assistant mentioned, only to discover it was a birthday party. At first, she thought that Gabriel Andrew and his son finally remembered that today was her birthday, and she was momentarily stunned. But the next second, she saw Victoria walking towards her with a beaming smile. "Miss Yi, you finally arrived." Following closely behind Victoria were Gabriel and Andrew, whose expressions changed immediately upon seeing her. Gabriel's gaze darkened, and Andrew grumbled as he tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, why did you call her over? I heard that today is also Miss Yi's birthday, the same day as mine. It's too pitiful to spend it alone at home, so I invited her over to liven things up." Victoria smiled, glancing at Sophia with a hint of pride. She casually pointed to the long table in the center of the banquet hall, which was filled with gift boxes of all sizes. "These are all the gifts that Gabriel and Andrew prepared for me. There are so many. I can't possibly take them all. Miss Yi, would you like to take a look? If you see something you like, I can give it to you. Otherwise, it would be too sad to not receive a gift on your birthday." Sophia noticed the boastful tone in her voice and shook her head slightly, not engaging with her words. "No need. Since they are gifts for Miss Yi, let Miss Yi have them." Seeing that she wouldn't respond, Victoria wasn't annoyed either. She walked up to the multi-layered cake, smiling as she looked at her. "Since you don't want a gift, why not make a wish?" Thinking of the wish that had just been interrupted, this time, she did not refuse. Sophia clasped her hands into fists, closed her eyes, and silently spoke the wish that no one knew about in her heart. "I wish to never see Gabriel Andrew and his son again." Chapter 8. After making her wish, Victoria still had no intention of letting her off the hook. She feigned curiosity and asked, "What wish did Missy make? Why not share it?" She hadn't spoken yet, but Andrew's confident voice came through. "What else could there be? She wishes for me and Dad to be safe and happy every year, and this year will surely be no different." Beside him, Gabriel hadn't said a word, but from his eyes, Sophia could tell he clearly thought the same way. However, she had no intention of explaining. Misunderstandings like this can still reduce a lot of trouble. Victoria smiled as she brought over a drink and handed it to her. "Ms. Yi, it's quite a coincidence that we share the same birthday. How about we have a toast?" Ms. Yi wouldn't refuse, would she? As soon as she said that, Gabriel and Andrew all gathered around, their eyes warily watching Sophia, as if she were some kind of monster that would trouble Victoria. She paused for a moment, finding it somewhat amusing, and with a light laugh, she raised her glass to toast with Victoria. The birthday party was not yet over. After toasting, more people came to offer drinks. Victoria chatted generously with the guests, while Gabriel and Andrew remained by her side, shielding her from drinks and bringing her desserts. Someone noticed Sophia, who was sitting alone in the corner, and then looked at the father and son surrounding Victoria, and immediately began to gossip. "Han is really good to Miss He, even neglecting his own wife, always staying by Miss He's side. Who told you that Miss He is Han's white moonlight? If it weren't for Miss He's sudden departure back then, how could Sophia have had the chance to be Mrs. Han? I say, She might as well have divorced and left early, to avoid making a scene in the end. You should also consider who she married, the wife of the richest man. How could she possibly bear to leave? The voices of discussion were not small. Even in the corner, Sophia could hear their words clearly. Leaving Gabriel? She smiled. Without their urging, she would soon disappear forever from their lives, vanish from this world. At that moment, the banquet foyer suddenly became noisy. She stood up and realized it was Victoria who suddenly said she had a stomach ache. Gabriel quickly called for a private doctor, and after a round of diagnosis, the doctor hesitantly said, "Mr. Hahn, Miss He's symptoms indicate she has been poisoned. We need to rush her to the hospital for a stomach wash." Upon hearing this, Gabriel's expression instantly turned extremely grim as he picked up the pale-faced Victoria and rushed out of the banquet hall, leaving behind a chilling remark, "Who did this? Find out for me." With the protagonist in trouble, the banquet could no longer continue, and the guests hurriedly left. While Sophia returned to the villa alone, she initially thought this incident had nothing to do with her and was just waiting for the system to take her back to the real world when, unexpectedly, a few bodyguards suddenly burst in and escorted her straight to Victoria. "Sophia, I told you, as long as you behave yourself, I won't touch your position," but you repeatedly lay hands on Victoria. "It's simply stubbornness. Sophia, you wicked woman. How dare you poison my mother?" She was suddenly brought here, and the anger of the two, one big and one small, swept towards her. It was only then that she roughly understood the reason from their words. They believed that the person who poisoned Victoria was her? "I didn't do it," Sophia exclaimed, exasperated, not to mention that she was about to leave this world. It was hardly worth it to poison Victoria. Even if she truly hated Victoria, they had been by Victoria's side the entire time. How could she have had the chance to poison her? But they turned a deaf ear to her defense. Gabriel even directly turned to look at Victoria, his voice softening a bit, carrying a soothing tone. "What do you want to do with her? I will not cover for her. After all, she is your wife, and it wouldn't be good to send her to the police and lose face. Otherwise, just hand her over to me for a day, and I will make her confess." Victoria looked at Sophia, who was held by the bodyguard, a triumphant smile curling at the corners of her mouth. She thought they would agree readily, but to her surprise, there was no response after a long wait. She looked up and saw Gabriel's hesitation on his face, while Andrew also showed hesitation. "Mom, what do you want to do after you leave for a day?" Chapter 9. Upon meeting their gaze, Victoria's eyes suddenly turned red. "I wouldn't dare to step on an ant, so how could I possibly do anything excessive to Missy? I just want to reason with her and help her recognize her mistakes." Although she said this, for some reason, a sense of panic suddenly arose in Gabriel's heart. But in the end, perhaps it was because he felt she had a point, or perhaps he simply didn't want to see her wronged. He still agreed, only emphasizing several times that it had to be returned the next day. Even Andrew was hesitant to leave, and in the end, he also worriedly reminded her, "You must return her in one piece." "Mom, I will." Victoria smiled gently, but once the two father and son left, her expression suddenly changed. She sent someone to take Sophia back to the He family's villa, and after closing the door, Sophia clearly saw the malicious glint in her eyes. Victoria gave a knowing glance to the bodyguard, who understood immediately and stepped forward, kicking her down to the ground and pulling out a rope to bind her tightly. That kick was delivered with full force. Sophia felt a sharp pain in her back and had already fallen to the ground. Before she could recover from the pain, Victoria took the whip from the bodyguard's hand and struck her fiercely. The force was so great that blood was drawn in an instant. "Ah!" The searing pain made her cry out involuntarily. Having witnessed Victoria's two-faced nature, she naturally knew that Victoria's intention in taking her away was far from good. But she never expected that she would be so impatient and resort to such cruelty against her. Immediately after, the second whip, the third whip, and the fourth whip came down one after another with great force. "Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to explain yourself a day later if you hit me like this?" Sophia lay in a pool of blood, unable to hold back her questions any longer. Hearing her question, Victoria was not the least bit flustered. "Don't worry. As long as you don't disappear into thin air, even if I beat you to the brink of death, I will have a reason to cover it up." Her voice was filled with pride. But Sophia suddenly smiled. But soon, she would disappear into thin air. Victoria didn't see her smile, yet tirelessly swung the whip, which gradually became stained with blood, while the curses continued to echo in her ears. "Bitch. I'll make you fight me for a man. I'll make you fight me for a child." Sophia was whipped until her body was covered in blood, yet still did not beg for mercy. "So the poison was really your doing? But wasn't it you who wanted to leave and not keep them in the first place?" Hearing this, Victoria let out a sneer. "Even if I didn't want them, it wouldn't be up to you. I don't know what kind of enchantment you used, but how could you make Gabriel refuse to divorce you?" Her mouth was filled with the metallic, rusty taste brought on by the pain of enduring, and her complaints only made Sophia find it laughable. Gabriel, isn't his unwillingness to divorce also to fulfill her innate freedom? It was she who wanted to leave at first, and after leaving, she was dissatisfied that Gabriel had someone else by his side. Victoria didn't know what was on her mind, and in a fit of anger, she whipped harder and harder, each lash almost deadly, until the phone on the sofa rang. It was Gabriel calling. Her expression changed, and she finally stopped the whipping and answered the phone. "Over there." It was concise, without a greeting, directly getting to the point. Let Sophia take the call. Her face stiffened, unwillingly handing the phone to Sophia, her eyes filled with malice. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. Yet Sophia understood her meaning from her lip movements. "If you dare to say a word, I'll make sure you don't leave alive. Victoria didn't do anything to you, right?" Gabriel's rare concern left her silent for a long time, but she still chose not to complain at that moment, only managing to utter 2 weak words. "No." Through the phone receiver, Sophia could also hear the sigh of relief from the other side. "I'll come to pick you up tonight." Just as the call was about to end, a tender voice from Andrew came through on the other end. She forced a smile, feeling confused about why they suddenly seemed to care about her today. Could they sense that she was about to leave? Seeing her in silence, the breathing on the other end grew slightly heavier. Just as they were about to speak, Victoria snatched the phone and hung up, throwing the whip to the bodyguard, her eyes colder than ever. "Just leave her with a breath of life. Isn't Han supposed to come pick someone up tonight?" The bodyguard hesitated with the whip in hand, but was met with a fierce glare from her. "I'll go out now and find a way to stall them. You just need to torment her until dawn." Victoria left, but the torment did not end. The pain invaded Sophia's entire consciousness with each strike of the whip. That night, she indeed did not see them. For Victoria, they broke their promise again. Until dawn, the bodyguards who took turns finally stopped their actions. Sophia had already been beaten to a pulp, covered in wounds, and almost turned into a bloody figure. A shocking sight. The faint roar of cars could be heard outside the villa, and the bodyguards' expressions changed drastically as they hurriedly called for the servants. The servants dragged her into the room, changing her clothes and touching up her makeup. And finally, after helping her sit down on the sofa, a group of people vanished without a trace. When the entire villa was left with only her, a floating golden light suddenly appeared before her eyes. "Congratulations, host! The companionship task has been completed. Your family in reality has been revived. May I ask if the host wishes to leave this world immediately?" Sophia was excited in her heart, but had no strength left on her face. She simply looked up at the system and asked, "Before I leave, could you do me a favor?" "What does the host want me to do?" The mechanical voice of the system came. "Help me retrieve all the surveillance videos from these past few days where Victoria framed and harmed me. Consider it my last gift to the father and son in this world." "Okay. Please prepare. Host, I am about to take you home." As the voice fell, golden light descended upon Sophia, and in an instant, it vanished without a trace, leaving only a surveillance video quietly placed on the sofa where she had originally been sitting. In the next second, the door opened. Chapter 10. Gabriel and Andrew were the first to enter, and as they looked at the empty living room, the feeling of unease in their hearts grew stronger, as if something had slipped away that they could not hold on to. Not seeing the person he wanted to see, Gabriel furrowed his brows tightly and looked at Victoria, who had just entered behind him, and asked, "Where is Sophia?" She smiled somewhat forcedly, raising her hand to point in the direction of the sofa. "Isn't the person just sitting on the?" She intended to say that the person was just sitting nicely on the sofa, but when she turned her head, she saw the empty sofa and was slightly taken aback. In the next moment, her gaze sharply swept towards the several bodyguards. Seeing the person suddenly disappear, the bodyguards were also greatly shocked and hurriedly shook their heads to explain to Gabriel, "Mr. Han, when we went out, the lady was indeed sitting on the sofa. Where is that person?" Seeing that everyone began to stammer and couldn't explain themselves, he felt a surge of anger rising to his head and shouted sternly, "Why aren't you going to find him quickly?" A few people felt they had no words to express their suffering. They couldn't tell Gabriel that they had beaten Sophia for an entire night, and that with such serious injuries, she should have been unable to leave. Yet, she was not only absent from the living room, but they had also searched the entire villa without finding any trace of Sophia. Andrew also didn't know why. Since he left his villa with Gabriel yesterday, his heart has been inexplicably anxious. Until last night when Gabriel made that phone call. Hearing Sophia's words finally put him at ease. He thought he would see her today, but upon arriving here, he found that she had actually gone missing. The feeling of unease swept over him again from the depths of his heart. He looked up at Victoria, his eyes carrying a blame he wasn't even aware of himself. "Mom, didn't we agree to return her in one piece today?" Seeing the resentment in Andrew's heart, she felt awkward and instinctively looked at Gabriel for comfort, only to find a hint of blame in his gaze as well. In that moment, a sense of grievance spread from the depths of her heart. Victoria never expected they would question her over Sophia, though it didn't show on her face. Her jealousy towards Sophia grew a little more in her heart. They were originally her husband and son, but after 5 years, they found someone else to replace her. They didn't want a divorce, and now Sophia has simply disappeared, and they actually started blaming her? I really don't know. Haven't I been with you all since last night? How could I possibly do anything to miss ye? How can you look at me like this? But in an instant, her eyes turned red, and Gabriel and Andrew felt a pang of regret. "Victoria, I'm not blaming you. It's just that now Sophia has suddenly disappeared, and we need to find her first." "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to blame you." The apology from the two did not earn Victoria's forgiveness. She angrily walked to the sofa, ready to sit down, and saw the surveillance video placed on the sofa, filled with confusion, not knowing where it came from. Just as she was about to pick it up, the father and son duo, Gabriel, who had followed her, also noticed the surveillance video and quickly took it, asking, "What is this? A tape?" Seeing that both of them were very interested in the surveillance video, for some reason, a voice in Victoria's heart told her not to let Gabriel and his son open that tape. Just as she was about to reach out to snatch it, the bodyguards returned with pale faces, saying, "Mr. Han, we have searched everywhere we could, but still haven't found the lady." In an instant, the air seemed to freeze. Andrew looked at the videotape in Gabriel's hand and suddenly spoke, "Dad, is this left by Ms. Yi?" Gabriel seemed to be reminded by him. Nowadays, no one knows where Sophia has gone, and the only clue seems to be the videotape in his hand. Thinking of this, he turned his gaze to the television opposite the sofa and casually pointed to a bodyguard. "You go play it, Gabriel. This isn't." Victoria's refusal hadn't been fully voiced when the bodyguard had already trembled forward to take the surveillance video. Starting to operate it, a group of people's gazes were all focused on the screen, fearing that something inappropriate might appear. In the next moment, the sound of crackling electricity rang out, and the scene clearly appeared in everyone's eyes. Chapter 11. The first to appear is the video from the day Victoria first moved into the Han house. The scene clearly shows how, after Sophia refused her help, she recklessly went to grab the soup bowl, then deliberately let go of her hand to spill the soup behind her. When Gabriel and Andrew arrived, she pretended to be pitiful, claiming that Sophia had intentionally spilled the soup on her. What followed was the complete video recording of the poisoning that occurred on the day of the birthday party. Gabriel watched as she, After receiving the drinks from the waiter, sneakily took out a packet of drugs from her bag and poured it all into one of the glasses of wine. Then, after being awakened from a stomach wash, she cried with tearful eyes and said Sophia was the mastermind behind it all. Next, there was the video from yesterday Gabriel and Andrew leaving his villa. She smiled gently, personally seeing the father and son off from the villa, then immediately changed her expression, picked up the whip, and fiercely struck Sophia while he was on the phone inquiring about Sophia's condition. He even threatened that Sophia was not allowed to seek help. After hanging up the phone, he ordered the bodyguard to continue tormenting her, saying that as long as she had a breath left, she would go and hold them off. The expressions on the faces of the father and son changed from initial astonishment and disbelief to compassion when they saw Sophia being tortured, and finally turned into hatred towards Victoria, their faces darkening as if they were about to drip ink. It was all fake. Victoria had been deceiving them all along. It was only at this moment that Gabriel and Andrew finally understood why Victoria had suddenly come to them last night, putting on a pitiful act and saying that she never wanted to be separated from them again. Is this what you meant by Sophia hurting you? Is this what you meant by you wouldn't Sophia how? Mom, didn't you say you would return ye in one piece today? If the previous inquiry was merely instinctive, this time Gabriel and Andrew were left with only estrangement and questioning in their tone. Meanwhile, Victoria had started to panic the moment the first scene appeared, her small face turning pale. She couldn't understand how Sophia could end up in such a state and still manage to escape, even leaving behind a surveillance video that seemed to come from nowhere, plotting against her. Victoria collapsed onto the ground, her legs weak, shaking her head repeatedly, still not forgetting to defend herself. Gabriel, Andrew, you have to believe me. I didn't do this. Those videos must have been fabricated by that bitch Sophia to frame me. You know I wouldn't even dare to step on an ant. How could I do something like this? She was so busy defending herself that she forgot the persona she had created in front of Gabriel and Andrew. And how could she casually call someone a bitch like that? Gabriel, his eyes were as dark as ink, gripping her chin tightly. He sneered. I was wrong to believe that you, the woman who cruelly abandoned me and Andrew 5 years ago, had a kind heart. I believed your words and sought to punish Sophia, not knowing that you are the truly vicious one. Victoria, I misjudged you, but one must take responsibility for their own mistakes. Don't you think? How do you think I should punish you? Victoria took in the hatred in his eyes, panicking as she sought mercy, her gaze searching around until it landed on Andrew. She looked at him pleadingly, hoping he would intercede for her. Andrew, please ask Dad for mercy. Mom knows she was wrong. You can't treat me like this. Andrew reached out and tugged Gabriel's sleeve. Seeing this, a glimmer of hope and pride flashed in her eyes. Look, no matter how good Sophia is to Andrew, it doesn't change the fact that he still can't remember her kindness. With just one word from himself, he would still plead for her. Gabriel turned to look at Andrew, his face showing suppressed anger, clearly feeling that he was about to plead for Victoria. But in the next second, his words surprised everyone. Dad, you can punish her anytime, but the urgent matter now is to quickly find Mom. This is Victoria's first time after returning that Andrew called Sophia Mom. But unfortunately, she can no longer hear it and has long since stopped caring. Chapter 12. When Victoria heard the changed title, the glimmer of hope that had just risen was instantly shattered. She was filled with disbelief, unable to accept that they had all given up on themselves simply because of a sudden video of unknown origin. Gabriel, Andrew, she shouted loudly, but the father and son left without looking back, leaving only a few bodyguards to tie up Victoria and those who had whipped Sophia, taking them back to the Han family villa and locking them up, while the remaining bodyguards slowly expanded their search area along the He family villa. But he searched through his home, scoured the villa district, combed through City B, and searched the entire country. Yet he never found any trace of Sophia again. Gabriel and Andrew, father and son, never gave up searching for Sophia. They reported it to the police and issued reward notices. But 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, and 3 years passed, and still, they found nothing. B City Prison, separated by a layer of special glass, Victoria and Gabriel sat facing each other. Victoria was wearing a striped prison uniform, her face haggard, and her exposed skin was covered in crisscrossing scars, with a wrinkled and hideously ugly scar on her face. It was burned. Outside the glass, Gabriel's expression was cold and stern, showing no sign of sympathy for her current plight, as these scars were all tied to him. 3 years ago, after he learned everything that Victoria had done, he brought her back to the villa and returned everything she had inflicted upon Sophia. From that steaming hot soup, he personally boiled a pot of water and poured it over her right face, showing no mercy despite her cries for mercy. For every whip she struck Sophia, he returned with an equal number of lashes, until she was screaming incessantly, on the brink of death, if it weren't for the fact that she reported the missing Sophia to the police later, which led to a series of events. What Victoria did would have been exposed as well. When she was condemned by thousands and thrown into prison, it is likely that Victoria would have to endure countless torments at his hands. But even after entering prison, her days did not improve much. She was scorned as a shameless mistress, ostracized by all her fellow inmates, and it was common for her to be beaten and go without food. They had long since severed ties, and there was no possibility of sitting down to communicate properly. Thus, at this moment, both Gabriel and Andrew wore expressions of impatience. "Didn't you say you knew where Sophia was?" Both father and son were unwilling to come here. The people from the outside world searched for 3 years without finding them. How could a person locked in a prison know? Unless she had ruthlessly hidden Sophia away from the beginning. But if that were the case, she wouldn't have waited until today, 3 years later, to be willing to tell them. As long as there is even a glimmer of hope, they do not want to let it slip away. Victoria grinned with the half of her mouth that had not stiffened from the burn, looking extremely strange. If a timid person saw this, they would likely be scared enough to have nightmares. But at this moment, even 8-year-old Andrew remained unfazed upon witnessing the scene. She seemed to be unaware, her voice hoarse as she spoke. "Yeah, I know. She has long been gone from our world, returned to her own. Isn't it ridiculous that you all are tormenting me here, wasting so much manpower and resources to find her, when in fact, she never loved you at all?" Gabriel and Andrew were first taken aback by these words, and their second reaction was disbelief. "What do you mean she's not in this world? What do you mean she never loved them? It's all nonsense. A bunch of absurd and nonsensical talk." The expressions of the father and son were surprisingly, feeling that Victoria was deliberately speaking to provoke them because of their previous torment. They immediately darkened their faces and stood up to leave. But she called out to them again. "Don't you want to know who the 2 people in the photo that Sophia had that time are?" Chapter 13. A hoarse voice came through the phone that had been carelessly tossed on the table, somewhat distorted and hard to hear, yet it left Gabriel and Andrew frozen in place. Buried memories suddenly broke through the surface, flipping through pages of recollections, finally settling on the photo they had only seen once. And it was clear they remembered it too. The slightly yellowed and worn photograph, featuring 2 people, one large and one small, filled with love and intimacy in their eyes, along with the nostalgic gaze of Sophia, who murmured about returning to their side 3 days later, and the gentle fingers caressing the photograph, and how, with a bit of effort, she would painfully snatch the photo back. No matter how you think about it, their relationship shouldn't be that of friends who haven't been in touch for a long time. Victoria watched as they stood frozen in place, her eyes tinged with a mad delight. She had been tormented for a full 3 years. Why should they be able to live comfortably and joyfully? "In the past few days, I had a dream about another world, a world that is like ours. But that world has no Han family, no Gabriel, and no Andrew. But that world has Sophia. She is holding 2 people, the same 2 people in that photo. One called her wife and the other called her mom. I can see that her state when she is with them is different from when she is with you. There, her happiness is genuine happiness, and her love for them is true love. Not like with you, where she is compliant and lives like a puppet. I saw a golden light sphere. Sophia called it the system, and occasionally spoke to it. Only then did I realize that Sophia is not from this world. She is here to accompany you because her husband and child in that world were in a car accident and became vegetative. She accepted the companionship task issued by the system, accompanying you for 5 years, and one of the task requirements is to obey you completely. She has never loved you. In her eyes, you are merely task subjects. Victoria became more and more eloquent, but with each word she spoke, Gabriel and Andrew grew paler, until Andrew was completely drained of color. His eyes filled with confusion and helplessness. "You're lying." The 3 short words were spoken with a voice already choked with tears. Wanting to argue, wanting to deny. As he looked up with tear-filled eyes at Gabriel, "Dad, she's lying to us, right? How could Mom not love us? How could that be?" For 5 years, Sophia had been utterly compliant with them. No matter how unreasonable their demands were, she would do her best to fulfill them. Even when they wronged her, they didn't need to apologize as long as they offered her a way out, saying they wanted to eat the meals she prepared. She would eagerly make them and deliver them right to their table. "Oh right," Victoria said. "That's because of the system's requirements." Andrew struggled with it in his heart for a long time, but found that besides companionship and obedience, he seemed unable to find any other evidence that Sophia loved them, and Gabriel answered him in silence. But inside, his heart was stirred by Victoria's words like a raging tide. He suddenly remembered that at that time Sophia was always mumbling about 7 days, 5 days, 3 days. When asked, she would only say it was nothing. But now, upon careful reflection, wasn't the day she disappeared exactly the last day of her countdown? Gabriel didn't want to believe it, but the scales in his heart had already tipped towards Victoria's words. Yet she still felt that the fire wasn't big enough, constantly adding fuel to the flames. Otherwise, just think about it yourselves. That villa belonging to the He family must have been thoroughly searched by you over the past 3 years. How could a 25-year-old woman, who had suffered such serious injuries, manage to escape from the villa in just 3 minutes without being captured on any surveillance, leaving not a single trace behind? How did she obtain the surveillance video that framed me and showed her being whipped? Isn't it just because everything was helped by the system for her? It's really quite laughable. I actually ended up arguing with a father and son who think themselves deeply affectionate, even though they don't care about you at all and aren't even from the same world as us. So I deserve the outcome I've faced. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 14. Victoria has lost her mind. When Gabriel and Andrew left the visiting room, they were equally dazed, stumbling as they walked. The short distance from the prison entrance to the car was just a few steps, yet they nearly fell 5 times. They still needed the bodyguard to stay by their side to prevent them from embarrassing themselves in public. Returning to Han family's villa, Gabriel locked himself in his room, refusing to see anyone, including Andrew. He had been married to Sophia for 5 years and had never considered the possibility that she did not love him. He simply thought she loved him so much that she could extend that love to him and Victoria's son, being completely obedient to them. Thus, she could calmly accept his indifference, his brother's disdain, and mockery, so she didn't care at all that he and Victoria reeked back to their old flame, even bringing Victoria back to the villa. But was it really just because of a lack of love that she didn't care? He suddenly felt very jealous of the person in that photo, who could be so deeply loved by her, and could marry a complete stranger in this unfamiliar world after their unexpected car accident left him a vegetable, dutifully caring for another pair of father and son for 5 years, all to revive those 2 people. Gabriel originally thought he owed her something and wanted to make amends, but after searching for a long time without success, he still refused to give up. He thought it was an obsession, but it was only at this moment that he realized it wasn't. It is not about debt, nor obsession, but rather that he had unknowingly fallen in love with her long ago. He just couldn't bring himself to admit that he had fallen for a woman who was once called a simp by his friends. She is wonderful, but he is too timid to admit it. Even when Victoria says she wants to take her away, he doesn't dare to firmly keep her. If he could have recognized his feelings earlier, would their story have had a different ending? Would she have felt a little reluctant to leave because of him and Andrew? Unfortunately, there are no ifs in this world. In another room, Andrew searched the entire villa, only to despondently discover that there was indeed not a trace of Sophia left behind. to the point where he could no longer even feel nostalgia for her. People only come to understand the value of a person or thing after losing it. Just like when Sophia was still by his side, he took for granted that she would never be angry with him, that she would always obey him no matter what, and he would recklessly hurt her and belittle her. Now, upon learning that she had another child and that he would never see her again, his heart suddenly felt empty, as if he had lost his most beloved toy. Andrew remembered the 2 times he discovered Sophia burning her belongings. Looking back now, she may have already been thinking about leaving at that time. If he had noticed something was wrong and chosen to speak up, would everything have turned out differently? Would she have stayed? Would she have at least left him a glimmer of hope? Unfortunately, at that time, he only saw her actions and harshly said, "It's all garbage, and you better be burning your own things." Children's emotions come and go quickly, and they cannot suppress them like adults. He could only lean against the door of the room where Sophia had once lived, hugging his knees and crying uncontrollably. From then on, he no longer had a mother. The servants in the villa did not know what had happened. They only knew that one of the 2 masters returned and locked himself in his room, with the only connection being sending wine inside, while the other ran to the room of the mistress who had been missing for 3 years, crying uncontrollably. No matter how much they tried to comfort him, he refused to open the door and did not stop crying, leaving them with no choice but to depart in disappointment. Until the night grew deep, one father and son had drunk too much and passed out, while the other cried himself to exhaustion, falling asleep against the door. Only then did the villa finally quiet down. That night, Gabriel met Andrew in a dream. Chapter 15. In a vast, white, empty space, Gabriel and Andrew looked bewildered, despite usually appearing calm and more mature than their peers. Upon suddenly arriving in an unfamiliar place, Andrew unconsciously moved closer to Gabriel, sensing that this place was unusual. Gabriel, after a brief moment of confusion, instinctively pulled Andrew behind him, vigilantly scanning the surroundings. At that moment, a beam of golden light suddenly appeared and stabilized completely in front of them after several flickers. System 1107 has received a strong desire and successfully linked with the host. Hello, 2 hosts. I am System 1107. I am pleased to serve the host. By completing the tasks issued by the system, you can gain an opportunity to fulfill a wish. May I ask if you are willing to bind? System? Fulfill a wish? The development of events was too fantastical. Gabriel and Andrew exchanged glances, feeling as if they were dreaming. Remembering the last conversation with Victoria, he unconsciously touched his left hand with his right, giving it a hard pinch. No feelings. Andrew watched in disbelief as his usually composed father directly twisted his own left hand. After twisting it, the sense of despair was evident, and he couldn't help but feel a bit lost himself. Was it really a dream? The system immediately saw what they were thinking and explained, "This is not a dream. The reason you cannot feel pain is that the system space only allows the soul to enter. Only when the soul is harmed will it feel pain. However, since damage to the soul cannot be restored, it is not recommended to attempt it. The last sentence completely dispelled Gabriel's temptation to try. How could he suffer an irreparable loss without seeing Sophia again? Thinking of this, he tightened his grip on Andrew's hand and looked up at the golden light. Can it really help us fulfill our wishes? Anything is possible? Can we go to another world to see the people we want to see? Hearing Gabriel's series of questions, a sense of hope also rose in Andrew's heart. From the moment he learned 3 years ago that Sophia had suffered so much injustice, to later discovering that she had ulterior motives for coming to them, he had been thinking about seeing her again every moment for the past 3 years. Now, suddenly learning that he could see her again, he was filled with excitement, yet also feared that it might all be in vain. Yes, as long as the tasks issued by the system are completed, there will be an opportunity to fulfill your wishes. Given the special nature of the host's wish, there are currently 2 options. Option 1, choose the companionship system, randomly travel to a world, and accompany the task object for 5 years. During this time, you cannot refuse any requests from the task object. Upon completion of the task, you will receive a reward to fulfill your wish once. Option 2, choose the wealth distribution system, enter a designated world, and bind to a specified task object. 90% of the wealth obtained in the task world will be transferred to the task object's name by any means, and once you choose to enter the task world, you will not be able to return to the original world. 2 choices correspond to 2 paths. Gabriel and Andrew exchanged glances, and without any hesitation, they spoke the same answer. I choose the second option. For them, that world no longer held anything worth cherishing, as long as they could stay by Sophia's side forever. What did it matter if they had to transfer 90% of their assets to her? This was something they owed her, a debt that needed to be repaid. As for that so-called companionship system, having to obediently accompany someone else for 5 years, they couldn't wait another moment. The golden light orb bounced up and down, as if nodding, and in the next instant, a mechanical electronic voice sounded. Task acceptance successful. World passage is connecting. With the sound echoing, Gabriel and Andrew felt a whirlwind before them, and soon they completely lost consciousness. When the father and son woke up again, the scene before them had already changed. The white ceiling and the pungent smell of disinfectant indicated that they were in a hospital. Drowsily opening his eyes, he saw a nurse busy changing their 4 bags. Hearing the noise, the nurse turned to take a look, a habitual smile on her face. You're awake. Chapter 16. In the 3rd year after returning to the original world, Sophia suddenly received a call from an unfamiliar number while she was at the rehabilitation center of a city central hospital, accompanying Leonardo and Tom for their therapy. Although it has been 3 years since they awoke from their comatose state, the long period of unconsciousness combined with the damage from the car accident means they still need rehabilitation to gradually return to their original condition. This was their last visit, and the phone rang just at that moment. Hello. May I ask if this is a mess? Sophia Yi? She answered the phone, and after confirming her identity, a strange female voice continued. This is the inpatient department of City a Central Hospital. 2 patients say they are your friends. Would you be able to come by? 2 patients? Sophia found it a bit strange, but thinking it wasn't too far, she agreed, saying, sure. After hanging up the phone, she greeted the 2 people in front of her, Leonardo and Tom, then got up and walked towards the inpatient department. The inpatient department is on the 5th floor across from the rehabilitation center. She took the elevator up, and after inquiring about the specific room number at the nurse's station, she walked over. In the cramped and small ward, blue curtains separated several beds, and only the curtains between the 2 beds in the middle were not drawn, clearly indicating the 2 patients she was looking for. She stepped forward but suddenly froze in place when she saw the 2 people sitting on the hospital bed. Gabriel. Andrew. Aren't they people from the mission world? How could they appear here, and in such a sorry state? In that world, they were worth billions, enjoying the best of everything. When have they ever lived in such a dilapidated house? When Gabriel and Andrew saw them, their eyes suddenly turned red. Sophia, we missed you so much. What did you go through all this trouble to bring me here for? After a brief moment of shock, she quickly regained her usual calmness. Her gaze towards them was as if she were looking at strangers, and the distant, cold look pierced their hearts. Andrew, in particular, jumped directly off the hospital bed and hugged her leg tightly. Mom, Dad and I know we were wrong. Can you forgive us? In the past, I was immature and took advantage of your indulgence to bully you on purpose, but I have really learned my lesson now. In just a few short sentences, tears welled up in his eyes, and combined with his adorable and delicate features, he was truly heart-melting. Gabriel couldn't bring himself to cry like he did with Sophia and could only secretly envy him. After biting his lip, he awkwardly spoke up. Sophia, we searched for you for 3 years. I misunderstood you a lot in the past and allowed Victoria to hurt you too many times. But after I learned the truth, I made sure she got what she deserved and sent her to prison. Sophia, we all know we were wrong. You can punish us however you want. Just please don't leave us, okay? The once cold and decisive tycoon Gabriel, who always maintained his pride and distance in front of her, finally lowered his noble head after reuniting with the person he had longed for over the past 3 years, begging for a shred of her compassion. Yet, the woman who once obeyed them without question, who was said to love them dearly, Sophia, felt not a ripple in her heart when faced with their humble pleas for mercy. The patient in the next bed heard their commotion and peeked through the curtains, taking in the awkwardness of Gabriel and Andrew, just as she was about to internally lament that she was truly a heartless woman, capable of abandoning her husband and child. She heard Sophia's voice. "I do have a husband and son, but they are not you, Mr. Han. We are merely ordinary friends who have met a few times. If you just want to stay here, there is no need to involve me. If my husband and child see this, they will be jealous." She ruthlessly pushed Andrew away from her lap, and after saying these words, she turned and left the hospital room, leaving behind a room full of patients whose curiosity was piqued, all casting either bold or discreet glances at them, wishing they had ears to catch the gossip. Chapter 17. It was winter, and snowflakes danced gently down from the sky. Sophia stood under the eaves, watching the softly falling snow as she reached out to catch a flake. The icy touch vanished in her palm in an instant, ultimately melting into a tiny droplet of water. 3 years had passed, and she thought she had forgotten everything she experienced when she crossed into this other world. But now the appearance of Gabriel and Andrew abruptly unearthed all those buried memories. Sophia suddenly recalled the day she completed her mission. The idea of time travel along with a system is too fantastical. Upon waking up again, she found herself back in the familiar room, and in her daze, she thought she had merely experienced an exceptionally vivid dream. But she was wearing it. The system could place her back to the moment 5 years ago when she had just left. However, all the injuries her body sustained in the task world had inevitably crossed over with her. The various wounds on her body were still raw and bleeding, not yet treated. There was a medicine cabinet in the villa, but she didn't even have the strength to stand up, let alone retrieve the medicine cabinet and tend to her own wounds. Although the servant could bring her the medicine cabinet and help her apply the medicine, she couldn't explain the source of all her injuries. Fortunately, the system did not completely leave after bringing her back. It noticed her difficulties and took into account that she had sustained such serious injuries to complete her mission, so it took the initiative to heal her wounds. Strands of golden light were stripped from the system and sent into her body, and soon she felt a wave of refreshing sensation throughout her being. Sophia was astonished as she raised her hand. The hand that had just moments ago shown the raw flesh now looked as good as new, even more delicate than before. It didn't resemble the hands of a woman who had obediently served Gabriel and Andrew for 5 years, but rather the hands of someone who, before her journey, had been cherished and pampered by Leonardo and Tom, untouched by the hardships of life. The moment her body was completely healed, her phone rang. She answered it, and on the other end was the nurse's voice, filled with excitement. "Madam, Mr. Wang and young Master Wang have woken up." Without hesitation, Sophia hung up the phone and hurriedly called the driver to head to City Central Hospital. The half-hour journey was compressed into 10 minutes. Unable to wait for the elevator that stopped on each floor, she simply ran towards the stairs. When she finally arrived at the ward, breathless, and pushed open the door, the people inside immediately turned to look at her. Under the afternoon sun, Leonardo's handsome face still bore a hint of pallor from his recent illness. A year of being bedridden had made his originally tall and slender figure appear somewhat frail. His pale lips curved into a faint smile, and his eyes could not look away the moment they saw her. The usually well-behaved and quiet Tom was held in Leonardo's arms, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes, looking like a little pitiful child who had just cried. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, his little head immediately turned around. When he saw Sophia, he promptly patted his father's hand, urging him to let go, and then he ran over, diving into her arms as she crouched down with her arms wide open. "Mom, as long as you're okay." Adding to that, the year when the car accident left him in a coma and in a vegetative state. Little Tom was only 5 years old. He couldn't be as calm as Leonardo after having faced death. During the car accident, they were in the same vehicle, and both he and his father were severely injured. Naturally, he was afraid that Sophia would still be unable to avoid injury under their protection, afraid that he would be separated from his mother, and even more afraid that he and his father would leave first, leaving her all alone. Sophia held Tom tight in her arms, tears the size of beans sliding down from the corners of her eyes. Before they could even fall onto the striped hospital gown on his shoulder, a large hand gently wiped them away. She looked up, tears blurring her vision. She wanted to speak, but the bitterness and grievance in her throat made her nose turn red, and tears fell down in large drops once again. Leonardo patiently wiped away all the tear stains on her face. Gently kissing her cheek, he wrapped his long arms around both of them, soothing her softly. I'm sorry for making you worried during this time with Tom. It won't happen again. Don't cry anymore. If you keep crying, you'll turn into a little kitten. Tom's little hand kept gently patting her back until her emotions finally eased. When the nurse came to check on them and saw them like this, she smiled and comforted them, saying, "It's a good thing that the patient has awakened. Awakening 2 vegetative patients at once is like experiencing 2 miracles. With such luck, I believe that Mr. Wang and little Tom will both get better." Chapter 18. Only Leonardo and Tom were present, and at that moment, Sophia felt a bit shy for the first time with others around. She hastily wiped her face, stood up, and smiled shyly. How can this not be considered a miracle? Originally, she could only quietly fade away, but miraculously, she encountered the system. After enduring 5 years of grievances, she could exchange it for their lives. She had gained something, but awakening does not mean healing. Many after effects from the car accident still require a long period of rehabilitation to gradually reach the best state. Fortunately, with the help of the system, their rehabilitation process has been quite smooth. Mom! Sophia! The 2 calls jolted her from her memories. She turned around and saw Leonardo and Tom standing under the eaves on the other side, their eyes filled with love and tenderness. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, swirling snowflakes towards a few people, finally landing on their heads and shoulders. She fought against them under the eaves through the wind and snow, but in just a few steps, the flying snow had taken over her head. Mom and Dad's hair has turned white. Is this what the ancients meant by growing old together? Leonardo smiled and nodded, brushing the snow off her, adjusting her scarf, handing the umbrella to Tom, lifting him with one arm while holding Sophia's hand with the other. Let's go home. Let's go home. The 2 held hands tightly, with Tom using both hands to barely stabilize the umbrella over the 3 of them, their voices filled with joy and excitement. We're going home. Behind them, Gabriel and Andrew watched the warm and harmonious interaction of the 3, their eyes red and their throats choked with emotion. They had not forgotten that they had chased after her to seek Sophia's soft heart, wanting her to return to their side. But at this moment, they simply couldn't bring themselves to move their legs to chase after her. Dad, will Mom never come back to be my mom again? Andrew, with red eyes, looked up at Gabriel, who had been silently watching Sophia and Leonardo Tom leave, his voice thick with tears as if he was about to cry at any moment. He sought an answer, a denial of the truth, but Gabriel only shook his head, saying nothing. No one knew whether he meant that Sophia would not abandon them, or that Sophia would never look back. Golden light flickered before the 2 of them, and a mechanical electronic voice announced their first mission since arriving in this world. Please, host, find a job as soon as possible and arrange for school enrollment. Their future would progress in an orderly manner according to the system's plan, studying, working, and acquiring endless wealth. But that wealth would never belong to them. Sophia first saw Gabriel and Andrew father and son at school. Tom's homeroom teacher called her, saying that her child had gotten into a fight at school and hoped she could come to handle it. She hung up the phone and hurried to the school, but felt quite confused. After all, Tom had always been well-behaved and obedient, and had never been involved in a fight with classmates. When she arrived at the school and saw another child with a wounded face, yet still full of anger, a faint suspicion arose in her heart. Sure enough, when the visitor arrived, the anger on Andrew's face instantly cracked. Mom, I didn't bully my classmate. Tom was not injured, but his posture made it seem like he had suffered a great injustice. Pointing at Andrew, who stood opposite him, complaining, he provoked me first and said you are his mom. Not my mom. Andrew really didn't expect Tom's mother to actually be Sophia. After all, he had only seen Tom twice, once 3 years ago through a photo, and once just a month ago. He doesn't remember the former very clearly. and he didn't really see what the child looked like at the time of the latter. This fight was merely because he saw a photo of Sophia and instinctively said that she was his mother, which led Tom to punch him hard. He certainly was not willing to back down and wanted to fight back, but he couldn't even touch Tom. Chapter 19. Andrew was originally waiting for Gabriel to back him up, having just taken a few punches without shedding a tear. When he saw Sophia heading straight for Tom, he immediately turned red with anger. "Mom," he pouted, looking at Sophia, who was gently coaxing others, with a heart full of grievance. It shouldn't be like this. She had been so good to him in the past, even if it was for a mission. How could 5 years of companionship be so easily forgotten? Tom heard his wronged mother, who rolled her eyes at him without hiding her disdain. "I already said this is my mom. Don't you have a mom of your own? Are you trying to steal my mom?" The teacher awkwardly glanced at Sophia, unsure of their relationship, and found it difficult to intervene. They have never encountered a child from any family who would specifically call another student's mother mom, and yet the other child is particularly prone to arguing or even fighting over this matter. A mom can only be your mom. She won't be someone else's mom. Sophia didn't even look at Andrew, first patting his back to calm him down, but with a hint of disapproval in her eyes. "Tom, but you're not the impulsive type. Can you tell Mom why you hit your classmate?" Tom pursed his lips. In fact, he didn't know why, but when he saw Andrew, he instinctively felt some resistance towards him, disliked him, and the irritation in his heart couldn't be stopped when he heard him call Sophia Mom. But seeing Sophia's furrowed brow, he still sighed, reached out to smooth the wrinkles on her forehead, and said, "Mom, I know fighting is bad. I won't do it again." Neither mother nor son paid any attention to Andrew behind them, treating him as if he were invisible. It was at this moment that Gabriel came over. Andrew is very smart. He had already self-studied the elementary school curriculum back in their original world. However, to adapt to the local customs, he casually chose a school that looked decent. Not expecting to encounter Sophia here, he instinctively wanted to approach her, but when he met her wary gaze, he awkwardly stepped back. "Sir, please take the time to properly teach your son. I understand that he has been without a mother since childhood and it's unfortunate, but my son does not like others casually calling me mom." The sorrow in Gabriel's eyes was so intense it felt almost tangible. He opened his mouth, wanting to explain something, but in the end, he couldn't say anything at all. He could only lower his head and apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll make him change his words." Andrew stared wide-eyed, unable to believe Gabriel actually said something about making him change his words. But a mom is a mom. Why should he change his words? "Dad," Gabriel rubbed the top of his head, sighed, and didn't explain anything to him. They had already been in this world for a month, and during this month, Gabriel had recalled countless times their past together. Regardless of whether Sophia approached him with an agenda, she truly never wronged herself during those 5 years. It was they who wronged her. It is only natural for her to blame them now. But Gabriel also believes that as long as they are sincere enough, there will come a day when Sophia will accept them. It's okay that he can't be her husband. If one day she softens towards Andrew, they would have a chance to move forward. Thus, after apologizing, he took her out of the office, earnestly advising her, "It's okay. When we came to this world, didn't we already prepare ourselves for the possibility that Sophia wouldn't accept us? What you need to do now is to play the victim. Let her see you, see the side of you that has suffered, until she is willing to accept you. She is a mother. If she saw the child she had devoted 5 years to raising being wronged, she could never be heartless and indifferent to Andrew. Could she?" On the other hand, Sophia was unaware of their thoughts. If she knew, she would probably just scoff. The reason she approached them was to revive Leonardo and Tom, based solely on those 5 years of interaction. There was fundamentally no emotional bond between them. Chapter 20. Days passed one by one, and soon it was New Year's Eve. The Wong family was filled with joy. The servants were all on leave, and the lights that burned all night enveloped the villa. In the kitchen, Sophia followed Leonardo as he brought out the dough for making dumplings. The suggestion to make dumplings was Sophia's idea. While taking care of Andrew at the Han household, she forced herself to learn many skills. and her cooking skills became so proficient that she could rival a 5-star chef. However, ever since returning to this world, she hasn't had the opportunity to do it herself. Usually, it's either the servants or Leonardo who prepare the food. This time, taking advantage of the servants' day off, she decided to make dumplings herself. Who would have thought that in the end, most of the work was still taken over by Leonardo and Tom? Just as the few of them were joking around and recording a video, the doorbell suddenly rang. The three exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of who would come at this hour. The last 3 people still went together to open the door. Gabriel was signing Andrew standing outside the door. Tom rolled his eyes the moment he saw them. "What are you here for? Rude." His tone was poor. Leonardo gave him a slap on the back of the head, jokingly scolding him, but it was clear it was just a formality and he didn't really mean to blame him. Watching him snort and hug Sophia's thigh, unwilling to look at him even once, was somewhat amusing. After a pause, he turned the topic back to the 2 people outside. "Who are you?" Gabriel and Andrew, the father and son, also did not pay attention, their gazes selectively ignoring everyone else, and they looked directly at Sophia. "Sophia, can we talk to you alone?" "Sorry, sir, it's not appropriate to talk alone at this time." "Is it?" The flour that stuck to her face was falling off in flakes. She reached out to wipe it, but ended up making her face look like a little calico cat. Very cute. But unfortunately, the people standing beside her were not them. Seeing her refuse without a hint of hesitation, Gabriel and Andrew's faces turned pale. They seemed not to expect her to refuse so decisively. He felt bitter in his heart, yet still did not want to leave. Andrew instantly reddened his eyes, his voice filled with grievance and a sobbing tone. "Mom, do you really not want us anymore?" Sophia helplessly prepared to say something when she heard Tom's voice, which sounded like it was wrapped in explosives, full of anger. "Andrew, haven't you had enough of a beating last time? If you want a mom, go find your own mom. Don't cling to mine. Otherwise, I'll tell you, every time I see you, I'll hit you." She was taken aback, and Leonardo was equally stunned, not understanding why the usually obedient and well-behaved person suddenly became extremely irritable. This aggressive and hostile statement even startled Andrew into a gasp, and he couldn't help but burp. Tom glanced at him disdainfully, then turned to Gabriel and rolled his eyes directly at him. "Stop being a clingy pest. If you have something to say, say it. If not, get lost." From that call of mom, Tom's attitude only seemed to plummet. Gabriel was unwilling to leave, but staring at the deathly gaze of the 2 Wong family members, he could only grit his teeth and hand over the things he had prepared long ago. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to adopt a gentle and friendly demeanor. "Sophia, Happy New Year." Sophia looked down at the gift box, just about to refuse, when a flash of golden light suddenly appeared. "This is just a system task, but it is still recommended that the host accept it. Afterward, regardless of how the host uses it, the system will not inquire further." She was taken aback, looking at the 2 people in front of her. Gabriel and Andrew's expressions remained unchanged, as if they could not see the system's conversation with her. The system flickered again and explained, "The system can choose any object to manifest, and those not selected, even if bound to the host, cannot see it." Chapter 21. Regarding the system that revived her lover and child, Sophia still trusted it very much, since the system advised her to accept it. She thought for a moment, and the refusal that was about to slip out was retracted. She accepted the gift and said a word to Wong. Gabriel and Andrew thought that their feelings had finally made an impact, and a glimmer of light flashed in their eyes, completely dispelling the earlier gloom. "All right, the gifts have been delivered, and it's time for you to leave." Leonardo narrowed his eyes slightly, his voice thick with displeasure, and his words to hurry them along were utterly unmasked. Gabriel and Andrew were puzzled as to why Leonardo, who had been silent just moments ago, suddenly began to urge them to leave. However, since the gifts had already been delivered, they chose not to dwell on their discomfort. There are no taxis available in the villa area. Gabriel and Andrew can only walk out. Over the past few months, the 2 of them often took the opportunity to go up and make their presence felt when Sophia was alone. But most of the time it was just a futile effort. This is the first time Sophia has not rejected or deliberately distanced herself from them. It seems that what they have done during this time is right, isn't it? And at this moment, in the Wong family villa, Sophia casually tossed the gift box in her hand onto the coffee table beside her. Looking at the two men, one large and one small, her gaze sweeping back and forth between them as she feigned seriousness and asked, "Come on, tell me the truth. What exactly have you two been hiding from me?" Just now, their hostility towards Andrew and Gabriel was too obvious. So obvious that Sophia found it difficult not to notice. Leonardo and Tom exchanged a glance, and after a moment, they both chuckled. Sophia was left confused by their laughter, and she suddenly felt a bit embarrassed and angry. Slamming her palm on the table, her tone carrying a hint of anger. Seeing that she was truly angry, Leonardo quickly poured a glass of water and handed it to her, while Tom hastily patted her back with his small hand, soothingly saying, Mom, please don't be angry. Both Dad and I will tell you. Actually, it's nothing much. It's just that recently, both Xiaoyi and I had a dream. In the dream, they had been in a coma for over a year, and from another perspective, they saw everything that Sophia had done for them. From the moment they first fell into a coma, she knelt in the operating room, praying to the heavens for them to survive. After learning they had become vegetative, she crawled up 3,000 steps, kneeling at a city's most revered Wangguang temple, praying to the deities for their recovery. They felt immense pain, wishing they could take their place. When they saw her bloody knees, they were filled with self-loathing, realizing that it was their helplessness that forced Sophia to go to such lengths for them. Leonardo and Tom watched as Sophia tried every possible way to save them in just 1 year, but all her efforts were in vain, until that golden glowing system found her. She finally found a way to revive them, but the cost was 5 years of her freedom and dignity. The father and son watched as she, who had been pampered and sheltered her whole life, was afraid to let go of them, and to save them, Sophia went to another world, married someone else, and dutifully cared for that father and son in every detail, only to be unceremoniously abandoned when the white moonlight returned. They do not understand why some people can consider not getting divorced as a form of charity and reward, and feel grateful for it. Seeing that Sophia only had 1 day left to leave, I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief for her. But then I saw Gabriel and Andrew handing her over to the ruthless Victoria. She was finally free. They had awakened, and they could finally protect her under their wings again, allowing her to pursue what she truly wanted to do. But at that moment, they chased after her, saying they wanted forgiveness. On what basis? Hurting at will when not in love, and clinging desperately when regretting. I'm sorry, Sophia. It was our failure to protect you. Sophia listened as they recounted everything she had experienced over the years. She had not shed a tear during those moments, but now her eyes suddenly brimmed with tears. The grievances suppressed in her heart burst forth, as she held one child who was rubbing tears on their clothes. Right. It's all your fault. Why did you just wake up now? Chapter 22. At the other end of City A. In the narrow and dilapidated rental room, most of the assets had been given to Sophia, leaving Gabriel and Andrew living in considerable hardship. After all, even the hospital fees they incurred upon waking up had to be borrowed from the system and needed to be repaid promptly. Fortunately, he was a billionaire in his previous life and had a sharp business mind. Within just a few months, he managed to pay off the debts with only 10% of the remaining balance. At this moment, the father and son were huddled on the filthy sofa, calculating when they could replace it, while watching the light screen in front of them. On the screen, there was a scene of Sophia, along with Leonardo and Tom, embracing each other in the Wong family's villa. Indeed, when they became the parties involved, they always felt that as long as they coaxed Sophia well, she would always return to their side. But it was only at this moment that they realized it was not the case. First, the bond between Sophia and Leonardo Tom as father and son is something that Gabriel, who never regarded her highly before, could not compare to. Just as she was willing to kneel before the heavens and pray for Leonardo and Tom, accepting the companionship task for them and obeying their every wish, no matter what grievances she suffered, she would not be driven away. Yet, The moment the 5-year task ended, she left that world without hesitation, just as she would express her grievances and cry out loud in front of Leonardo and Tom. In their presence, she seemed like a machine that never tired. Just as she would act cute in front of Leonardo and Tom, saying it was all their fault but never truly getting angry with them. However, when they sent gifts, she would politely accept them and then casually toss them aside. In Sophia's heart, Gabriel and Andrew could not compare at all to Leonardo and Tom. They despondently realized this fact but couldn't help but scold themselves for it. Just as she had accompanied Tom and Andrew for 5 years. During those 5 years, if Andrew had shown her even a little respect, treating her as his own mother, after Sophia had toiled for 5 years to raise him, he would not have refused to call her mom again after Victoria's return, even saying to her face that I only have one mom. Perhaps if they had come to this world together, Sophia would not have treated them so ruthlessly. But now, there is no room for them to turn back. He no longer has a mother. From this moment on, or perhaps from even earlier, when he truly accepted Gabriel and those brothers' words, believing that Sophia was merely a caretaker who could look after them well, he no longer had a mother. The light gradually dimmed, and Andrew could no longer hold back, throwing himself into Gabriel's arms, crying out loud, "Wong family villa." After Sophia finished crying, she finally remembered the gift box that the system had asked her to accept. Her eyes were still red and swollen, but out of curiosity, she picked up the small box and opened it. It was not large, containing only a card and a note. "In the past, it was me and Andrew who let you down. This is our compensation to you. As long as we are alive, we will keep depositing money into this account. We hope you won't find it too little." She opened the account book and took a glance. It contained both small and large amounts, just barely exceeding 10,000. It seemed that their lives were indeed not going well these days. Chapter 23. That night, Sophia personally made dumplings. She always thought that no matter what it was, no matter how many meals she had made for Gabriel and Andrew, it was unreasonable that her true family had never eaten the food she made with her own hands. After eating and drinking enough, it is time to keep vigil. When children are full of energy, they can keep everyone awake. But when sleepiness comes, they fall asleep faster than anyone else. Tom was initially quite curious, as he rarely had the chance to stay up outside of his normal routine. One moment he was clamoring to watch this, and the next he was demanding to play that. Sophia was seeing her let loose and embrace her playful nature for the first time. Usually, she acted more like a little adult, measured in her actions, gentle and polite, almost a carbon copy of Leonardo. The pointer had just barely crossed 0, and Tom, having finished the first half of the night, suddenly seemed to be unwound like a clock, his little head drooping bit by bit, unable to muster any interest in anything. Sophia gently lifted him and placed him back on the bed, while he was still murmuring softly, "Mom, I want to keep Mom company for New Year's Eve." She let out a soft laugh, kissed his forehead, and then turned to leave the room. Just as she had closed the door behind him and stepped back, she bumped into a warm embrace. She was startled at first, but after realizing what had happened, she turned around and slapped him lightly, saying, "What are you doing, standing quietly behind me without a sound? Don't you know that scaring someone can be deadly?" As she muttered to herself and looked up, her gaze fell into his deep pupils. The hand that wrapped around her waist tightened unconsciously. He appeared to be an expressionless, handsome CEO, but when he spoke, he turned into a pitiful little puppy. "I want it too." He rested his chin on the top of her head, rubbing against her fluffy hair before speaking. She, however, pretended to be clueless and asked, "Want what?" Sophia still wanted to tease her. A hint of a smile appeared at the corner of her eye. In the next second, his handsome face loomed closer, and she instinctively closed her eyes. A light laugh came from above her head, making her ears turn red from embarrassment. Just as she was about to open her eyes and protest, she felt a warm, wet sensation at the corner of her eye. The next day at noon, Sophia had lunch and took a walk in a nearby park with Leonardo and Tom when Gabriel and Andrew suddenly blocked their way. It had only been one night, yet the two men's demeanor was vastly different from when they had left the night before. Ignoring the cold, dark expressions of Wang and his son. All of Gabriel and Andrew's gazes were fixed firmly on Sophia, perhaps fearing they would be driven away. The two men from the Han family quickly spoke up after blocking her, saying, "Sophia, can we talk privately? Just this once. Just once. We promise that after this, we will not appear in front of you again." Perhaps he really wanted the opportunity for this conversation. Gabriel even wagered everything he had on it. In fact, Sophia really wanted to say they could call a bodyguard, but after thinking it over, she decided against it. It seems they could always find her so precisely, and it had something to do with the system. If the system was involved, ordinary bodyguards might not be able to stop them. Exchanging one time for a permanent closeness isn't a bad deal. She turned to look at Leonardo and Tom, smiled at them, and said, "Wait for me a moment. I'll be right over." Okay. Although she really didn't want to let Sophia be alone with Gabriel Andrew, since she had already made her decision, they naturally wouldn't stop her. The three of them didn't walk too far and casually chose a stone table with a pavilion for cover to sit down. Just say what you need to say. Chapter 24. Her voice was light, devoid of joy, excitement, disgust, or hatred. It was as if the person in front of her was just two strangers who had nothing to do with her. Gabriel pulled at the corners of his mouth, a bitter taste spreading, his gaze tracing her features as if he wanted to etch her appearance deeply into his mind. But he didn't dare to delay too long, fearing it would provoke her aversion, so he quickly spoke up. "Sophia, do you really like them?" It was obvious who they referred to. Sophia frowned at him, her eyes seeming to say he had asked a foolish question, but he pressed his lips together, looking particularly stubborn, insisting on hearing her say the answer out loud. "Of course, we grew up together. He has chosen me, and I have chosen him. Tom is the child I carried for 10 months. He respects me, protects me, loves me. Who else would I love if not him? You and Andrew? Am I a masochist, destined to love someone who treats me like a nanny, has never trusted me, and can casually hand me over to others?" She tilted her head, her eyes filled with genuine confusion, while the two in front of her were blushing under her relentless questioning. Indeed, after doing so many outrageous things, how could they dare to hope that having once seen what happiness was like, Sophia would forgive them and return to their side? "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, Sophia." After a long silence, both Gabriel and Andrew lowered their heads in shame, their voices of apology weak and faint. But Sophia shook her head. "You have not experienced everything I have gone through, so I do not intend to accept your apologies. By the way, regarding how you address me, if I remember correctly, I did mention it. Mr. Han, I hope not to hear you call me Mom or Sophia again. I only have one son, Tom, and our relationship is not close enough to use nicknames. If there's nothing else, I'll be leaving now." After saying this, she stood up and walked towards the pavilion's exit, while Gabriel and Andrew, who heard her next words, widened their eyes in shock and stood up in unison after Sophia did, exclaiming, "Wait!" Her footsteps paused, and she turned slightly to look at them. "Is there something else? Mom, are you really not giving us any chance at all?" Andrew's eyes were red, his mouth turned down in a pitiful expression, while Gabriel's voice trembled, his eyes fixed on her, trying to find a trace of defiance in her gaze. "Sophia, do you really have to be so heartless? Cutting off all ties?" Hearing their words, she raised an eyebrow and let out a soft laugh. "Am I heartless? Didn't I also say that if you all went through everything I have, I could certainly forgive you? 3 years have passed, and you still haven't done that, have you?" After saying that, she no longer waited for Gabriel and Andrew's reaction, but directly walked out of the pavilion, heading towards Leonardo and Tom, who had been waiting outside. "Mom, have you finished your chat?" Seeing her come out, Tom hurriedly stepped forward and took her right hand. Sophia nodded. Leonardo also naturally stepped forward to take her other hand, and no one took the initiative to bring up the intentions of the Han father and son behind her. 3 people walked side by side, and suddenly small snowflakes began to fall from the sky, swirling down and landing gently on their shoulders, creating a beautiful and romantic picture. After that, Sophia really never saw Han and his son again. The next time she heard news about them was 3 years later. He indeed had great ability and rebuilt a business empire. But it was on that very day that Han and his son encountered a car accident on their way out. The following month, a lawyer came to Sophia with a will, bequeathing all the assets under Gabriel and Andrew's names to her. She accepted the inheritance but did not claim it for herself. Instead, she found a trustworthy foundation and donated all the money. From then on, there was no longer Gabriel and Andrew in the world, and Sophia had completely returned to her original timeline.